on now. And by attending this meeting, you agree to be part of that recording. Please mute your microphones and leave them muted throughout the talk. You can mute your microphone by clicking on the microphone icon in the lower left corner of your Zoom window. After the talk, I will moderate a discussion about Dr. Čivilytė's presentation. Please type your name in the chat and I will recognize you in turn. You may then unmute and ask your question. Alternatively, you may type your question in the chat and we can ask your question for you. You may open the chat window by clicking on the speech bubble icon labeled chat at the bottom center of your Zoom window. The Houghton chapter of the NYSAA would like to acknowledge that the current state of New York encompasses much of the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and many Algonquin nations, including the Shinnecock and the Unkachug. This acknowledgement is offered to demonstrate respect for these communities and the treaties made on these territories. Please watch your email announcement of the online lecture series sponsored by the New York State Archaeological Association. The committee is creating an exciting lineup of lectures for the upcoming season. Also, please be sure to check in with your local chapter of the New York State Archaeological Association and renew your membership for 2022. Thank you for all of your support for NYSAA, particularly during the COVID pandemic when it's difficult to gather in person. Importantly, I would like to acknowledge the Fulbright program for their support of Dr. Čivilytė and her research. We're excited to have her here in Buffalo, something which is made possible by the Fulbright Fellowship. We would also like to acknowledge representatives from the Institute for International Education, particularly Ambassador Les Grafman. Thank you for being here tonight, and we thank IIE and Fulbright for their support of international education and scholarly exchange. And now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Agnė Čivilytė, a Fulbright scholar and an affiliate with the Institute for European and Mediterranean Archaeology, IEMA, at the University of Buffalo. Dr. Čivilytė completed her undergraduate degree in her home country of Lithuania, earning a degree in archaeology from the University of Vilnius. She then completed her master's and doctoral work at the University at Heidelberg in Germany in the Institute of Prehistory and Early History and Near Eastern Archaeology. Her doctoral research interpreted Bronze Age weapon deposits in Northern Central Europe. Her other research interests include prehistoric warfare, technology and social development, archaeometallurgy, and memory and identity. Since 2004, Dr. Čivilytė has worked in the archaeology department of the Lithuanian Institute of History. Additionally, she has participated in archaeological excavations in the oldest sanctuary in Turkey, Göbekli Tepe, and in Mycenaean Greece, in Tiryns. She's a member of the Society of Lithuanian Archaeology and a member of the editorial board of the peer-reviewed journals Archeologia Baltica and Miestų Praeitis. She has accomplished all of this while also raising 2 children and enthusiastically pursuing her hobbies of learning new languages, Japanese storytelling, dancing, and sport. That brings us to tonight's presentation. Dr. Čivilytė's current research project is inspired by the centenary anniversary of the birth of Lithuanian archaeologist and anthropologist Marijos Gimbutas, and it celebrates Gimbutas' contributions to the field of archaeology. We are excited to have Dr. Čivilytė back in Buffalo and here with us tonight to present her research. Mexican figurines in the Marian Emily White Museum and the scenario of human depiction in prehistory, in memoriam of Marijos Gimbutienės. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Čivilytė. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for such a nice introduction. Good afternoon, fellow colleagues. First, I want to express my gratitude to Dr. Susan Maguire for the invitation to give this lecture tonight. As a Fulbright scholar, I am honored to be here at Buffalo University at the Department of Anthropology for more than 7 months to teach and to conduct research. I'm very delighted to speak to members of New York State Archaeological Association this evening. Last but not least, I also wish to thank all attendants. Today, I will be juxtaposing Mexican figurines with some of their European counterparts, a process that they found tremendously enjoyable and hope that you feel similarly. I'm going to share some of the ideas about anthropomorphic figurines that they have discovered here in Bafalo and suggest new and perhaps broader interpretational theories for the same. You may notice the word scenario in the title of the lecture. Why do I use this word? The term scenario is common in archaeology and means to connect different processes. Please bear in mind that we are dealing with man-made artistic figures in the instant case. Every single figure is a result of human fantasy and experience aimed at achieving a particular set of purposes. We can view those figurines as performing a special scenario or function. If I can direct your attention to this picture, clearly we see faces, quite expressive, aren't they? We seem to be looking at participants from unique ancient scenes, which capture a surprising tension that likely dominated the atmosphere. Indeed, those faces radiate, and I will come to them shortly. Today, I want to invite you to read between the lines to understand that both figurines are trying to convey, or as an archaeologist might say, let us try to understand the significance of those figurines to the people who made them. But before I start, I want to explain why I choose this topic. As European prehistorian, the bulk of my work is focused on the Bronze Age. I continue to analyze many bronze artifacts such as weapons, tools, etc., and other precious items such as amber. Nevertheless, my interest in prehistoric figurines started during my study years in Germany, when I attended Professor Sven Hansen's class about anthropomorphic figurines in the ancient times. She is the author of Fundamental Study, Pictures of Human in the Stone Age. And I attended his class while he worked on this monograph. At that time, he asked me to do some research on Tripoli-Cucuteni culture, since most of the material was published in Russian and Ukrainian languages, in which I am fluent. Furthermore, my interest in anthropomorphic figurines has grown with the celebration of the 100 years anniversary of Lithuanian-American archaeologist Marijos Gimbutienės. She was professor of European archaeology and Indo-European studies at the University of California, Los Angeles, 1963-1989. Gimbutienės authored case studies on human bodies in Neolithic Europe. Her main theory argues for the existence of so-called mother goddesses as a symbol of powerful women in that she terms Old Europe. This year started with different events and conferences, and I had the fortune of organizing one myself. I also worked with the International Archaeological Exhibition, Goddesses and Warriors, in the National Museum of Lithuania, where I selected objects from different European museums and wrote about their narratives. You might be asking me, why do you see Mexican figurines in the title, and what do they have to do with Marijos Gimbutienės? The reason is very simple. This is Marian White Museum and its collection at the Anthropology department of Bafalo University. As a big fan of museums, I first went around the totem pole hall and looked at the showcases. The human figurines caught my eyes. and in particular, the wooden box with human heads. This inspired me to conduct thorough research about those objects. With many thousands of figurines from prehistoric Europe in mind, I decided to bring these two worlds together to give an overview of how those human depictions can be understood and what role they played in ancient societies. As a preliminary point, I wish to emphasize that the European figurines considered herein belong to the completely different tradition than those from Mexico. Nonetheless, we can compare those human depictions as a universal phenomenon from ancient times, back then people had a pressing need to recreate figurative images of the human body. From here on, I will be dividing my lecture into the following parts: a brief overview of material in the museum, a discussion of Marijos Gimbutienės and her hypothesis of mother goddess and its reception in the archaeological community, gender of the figurines, human heads, life history of figurines, that means the technology, and interpretations of the human body in prehistoric Europe and Mexico. Let me very briefly give you an overview of the anthropomorphic collection from the Marian White Museum. There are two groups of figurines. You are now looking at the collection of that used to be called portrait heads, or more recently, warrior heads. In particular, those heads are mold-made and produced from the beginning of the Xolalpan phase. You see the table on the slide, to the end of the Metepec phase. We do not know much about these samples, aside from the fact that they were made in Teotihuacan. The valley of Teotihuacan is located in the northeastern corner of the central basin of Mexico, separated from the hustle and bustle of modern-day Mexico City by 40 kilometers. From 1st to 650 AD, a vibrant and powerful city developed. Magnificent pyramids and temples covered with brightly colored murals lined its civic and ceremonial center. High-walled residential apartment compounds of stone and adobe for its nearly 125,000 inhabitants crowded around the city center and spilling out over the valley floor, covering 8 square miles. It died suddenly over the course of just a few days in around 750 AD. The city was devoured by a raging fire. The causes of this collapse by arson remains unclear. It bears mentioning that among the artifacts that the inhabitants of Teotihuacan left behind, the millions of fragments of tiny terracotta figurines, broken pieces of clay that had once been fashioned into images of human and animals. Clay figurines must have been ubiquitous at Teotihuacan. In the 18th century, nearly 1,200 years after the city was abandoned, visitors report of thousands of small clay heads littering the Teotihuacan landscape. In the years since, archaeological excavation at the site have never failed to produce copious members of figurine fragments associated with structures from all phases of the city. Although they have occasionally been found in burials, they are usually found along with pieces of ceramic, obsidian, and other type of household debris in the material used as construction fill. The second group consists of the figurines from the Mezcala culture, or that was previously known as the Balsas culture. People of this culture lived by the Balsas River in the Mexican state of Guerrero. Very little archaeology has been done there, and the most recent projects were during the 90s, 50s, last century. The Mescala are well known for their greenstone figurines, which were treasured by later Mesoamerican peoples. And in fact, the Aztecs excavated more Mescala sites than modern archaeologists have done the same. Some of these figurines have even been found in the Aztec temple Major. Now, I want to turn your attention to Marijos Gimbutienės, whose expansive body of research continues to consistently feature in academic and popular discourse. John Chapman praised her as one of the most productive and wide-ranging scholars of European prehistory in the 20th century. In Gimbutienės' obituary published in the London Independent, Lord Colin Renfrew described her as a figure of extraordinary energy and talent whose work greatly enriched the discipline. Gimbutienės' research was supported by an encyclopedic background in European prehistory and a lifetime study of linguistics and mythology. Her theories have generated an enormous range of both positive and negative response within the academic world and beyond. She remains one of the best known archaeologists today, especially with regard to her migration theories, which have been proven by the ancient DNA. Gimbutienės conducted numerous excavations in southeastern Europe and possessed reading proficiency in many European languages. Gimbutienės coined the term Old Europe as her crown jewel contribution to the archaeological literature. The term refers to Neolithic and very early Copper Age societies of southeastern Europe. Gimbutienės herself described the genesis of the term and its associated concept as follows. I came to a point when I had to understand what was happening in Europe before the arrival of the Indo-Europeans. It was a very gradual process. During my excavations, I became aware that a culture existed that was the opposite of all that was known to be Indo-European. Gimbutienės identified several overarching features of old European societies between the 7th and 3rd millennium BC. One of these was the general lack of warfare, which was posited due to the lack of weapons at old European sites, absence of fortified settlements, and lack of depictions of weapons and fighting. Another was their matrifocal and matrilineal nature. This is supported by the religion of the goddess that Gimbutienės identified in old European material culture and by the prominence of women within it. She was inspired by hundreds of terracotta figurines that she saw in the museums and excavated during her field works. In her opinion, most of the figurines were depictions of naked female bodies. According to Gimbutienės, old European society was organized around the theocratic communal, namely a temple community guided by a queen priestess, her brother or uncle, and a council of women as a governing body. Furthermore, old European society was markedly egalitarian. Burials and grave goods reflect a condition of mutual respect between men and women. They show no evidence of an imbalance between the sexes or the subservience of one sex to the other. Hence, she wrote many books expanding on these observations. Consequently, they convinced many to believe that once upon a time, the mother goddess religion and matriarchal society existed. In turn, the New Age goddesses communities, ecofeminists, and Gaia movements were inspired by Gimbuta's peaceful old world and goddess ideas. A couple of decades later, new studies about the depictions of human bodies were published thanks to Gimbuta's works. I show only a couple of these. There are, of course, many works. However, not everybody agreed with her. New research shows that Neolithic Europe was neither as peaceful nor as egalitarian as Gimbutas had described. As I will discuss shortly, there are plenty of alternative perspectives on how could view those prehistoric figurines as something other than female deities. Let us have a closer look at the gender of the figurines. I want to mention here famous examples from Çatalhöyük. Maria Gimbutas was very much excited about Çatalhöyük when she read the first publications of James Miller. She wrote in her book like this: the main theme of these wall paintings and reliefs revolves around the goddess of regeneration, portrayed as a frog-shaped woman giving birth. That Gimbutas mentioned about was the goddess theme, which was repeating on other types of symbolic depictions and material culture, other than the figurines at Çatalhöyük, according to James Miller. The goddess reliefs on the building's walls, so-called temples or shrines, that depict her in a bird-giving posture becomes another group of finds. Mellard published drawings of some of those goddesses giving birth to bull heads and some depicted as their hair waving in the wind. The so-called mother goddess of Çatalhöyük is a female figure posing as a sovereign enthroned above two big felines, which are believed to be leopards. The tails of these big and probably wild cats are coiling up her shoulders, and their existence creates the effect that the stool on which this woman is sitting looks like a throne. James Mallard was probably so excited by this finding that he went further by interpreting the clay lump between the woman's feet as a goddess giving birth to a male child. You see it, yes? On the slide, you can see this. Of course, this was not the only female figurine Mallard found at Çatalhöyük, just the most famous one. During the new excavations, fragments of thousands of new figurines were found. All figurines were re-evaluated by the new team because the context and statistical information were not clearly revealed by previous excavations. This gave rise to different interpretations and new research questions. Questions about whether both figurines represented a deity or not became irrelevant. Rather, questions concerning patterns of figurine making, technology, utility, and mobility became more important. It turns out that the figurines were made up of ordinary material, often found in a secondary context, such as room fills, middens, also rubbish areas between walls, and so on. The majority are found in external as opposed to internal context. Moreover, the wear marks on the figurines make us think that they were mobile, possibly carried with or on the people, such as on necklaces, rather than shrine offering or ex votos. The female figurines that have highlighted breast and stomachs were usually interpreted as representation of fertility, but alternatively, These highlighted features may also be interpreted as representations of maturity, right? Because usually these body parts are depicted as flattened, drooping, and angular rather than robust and rounded in shape. The same can be said about figurines found in other Neolithic sites in Europe. It is hard to find figurines which could clearly indicate the pregnancy. Figures like humanoid phalli in Çatalhöyük show the importance of men in the society. This is not only here, the 3D depictions of this man organ is known. Just to mention is a large number of male figurines, some them wearing masks dating back to the 6th, 5th millennium BC in a large late Neolithic settlement near the town of Damianica in southwest Bulgaria. Obviously, many figurines described as females by Gimbutas are not females at all. They are just sexless. There are also examples of transgendered figurines in Europe, as we see here on the slides, this one. Much like Gimbutas, researchers working with Mexican anthropomorphic figures tended to interpret female figurines as reflecting as matriarchal society with a focus on fertility and mother goddesses. Interestingly, it is well documented in much of the Mesoamerican world that cross-dressing and third of mixed genders existed. According to Mandel, the great goddess incensu Gimbutas represents a female deity, convincingly arguing instead that this deity represents both male and female characteristics. If we are to assume Mandel is correct and the great goddess is not a goddess but a deity of mixed genders, then we as archaeologists cannot assume that a male in Teotihuacan culture followed proscribed male gender roles or a female followed prescribed female gender roles. Perhaps, as Mandel argues, gender at Teotihuacan is more fluid. We started today with the human heads in Teotihuacan. Usually it is assumed they were added to the clay bodies, right? Bearing in mind a huge amount of heads, the question arises, where are those bodies? To my knowledge, there is no evidence for it. The torsos we have doesn't seem to be figures to which the heads were added. That's why some researchers argue the heads may have been adorned with perishable materials. But let's think in other way. When looking into the Teotihuacan portrait heads in more details, indeed we see that they are generally not recovered as heads broken of the figurines' bodies, but rather separately produced figurines. This implies that the production of the heads was an act embedded with different meanings than the production of bodies. The idea of giving the human head special attention dates back to the 10th millennium BC in the Near East. The post-mortem removed skulls were covered with clay, painted, and deposited in groves. As we can see, also in Çatalhöyük, we have skeletons of human with removed skulls. The same scenario is depicted on the figurines apparently at the end of their use life cycle. Based on these observations, we clearly see the importance of the human head or the depiction of the human head. There is also evidence of separately modeled heads in southeastern Europe. Hence, we have to deal here with two actions: decapitation and evasion of the heads, and the creation of human heads in the form of independent figures. The first action was quite common activity in Neolithic Europe. The fragmentation of figures and breakage of their heads is part of rituals, that special attention was given to certain parts of figurine bodies. This behavior is convincingly described by Peter Beale. He believes that creation, transformation, and destruction of figurines was a social ritual practice that was performed to specific reason and according to known rules. Coming back to the Teotihuacan, the portrait figures could appear in the new light. It's possible that they were produced as a separate figurines without any intention to add them to bodies. This represents a tendency towards ritual conversions in cultures around the world. The production of figurines is a cultural process. For the creators of the statuettes, the selection of material was of great importance. Until now, we don't have any evidence that the anthropomorphic figurines in Neolithic Europe were produced in a workshop. No workshop until now is known. And it was very important to those people to choose the material, and most common material was clay, but also they used the special kind of stones, bone, also different other materials like amber in the Baltic region. So it was a clear selection of material, and it was important to those people which material they choose for production of figurines. Similar to European figurines, their Mexican counterparts were mostly made of clay. Almost all have some amount of white paint remnants in their crevices and grooves. In many cases, the vivid colors of red, black, and yellow that they paint over such that the white undercoat is still visible. On the contrary, in Teotihuacan, concentrations of figurine fragments, molds, and other figurine manufacturing debris in several areas of the city were located during the large-scale mapping of the city in the 1960s. So we have here to deal with special places of manufacturing of figurines. These areas have been interpreted by Warren Barber as evidence of possible figurine workshops. He defined at least 3 possible areas of craft specialization related to workshops of figurines. However, even here, he described the situation as follows. I would like to caution the reader that the term workshop should not elicit images of organized areas with foremen, apprentices, and workers. We know nothing as yet of organization of Teotihuacan figurine workshops. That was his idea, 1960s. As for the production of the figurines, there seems to have been a gradual move from handmade figurines to mold-made figurines as the city grew and developed with an interim period when both techniques were used, sometimes on the same figurine. In the later phase of Teotihuacan, all figurines were mold-made. We know that in one mold, 56 or maybe more can be produced. The innovation of the mold represents a shift to something approaching mass production and wider availability of figures in Teotihuacan society. Mass production means the disappearance of individual creativity. However, by studying the heads in Marian White Museum, I couldn't find any two identical examples. It is difficult to determine if the heads are hand-modeled or mold-made because it appears that they may have been produced from a mold and then altered after production. Interestingly, we can say more about the production of figurines in Teotihuacan. Warren Barber was the first to apply dactyloscopy or phylodermatoglyphic on the claimed figurines. She analyzed 38 samples and could surmise whether the figurines were produced by men, women, or children. He argues that the oldest figurines from around 250 AD were made by women. Later on, the second group of mold figurines was fashioned by men and may parallel the development of organized guilds with other crafts. Wherefore, in Barber's opinion, in the city last 100 years before it burned and collapsed, women regained dominance of the figurine production. This research was continued by Jennifer Fox Campbell. In her study, she analyzed around 400 fingerprints, and she came to very similar results, showing the changing the sex of figurine producer. Interestingly, 3 figurines were produced in greater volumes by females. This dissertation of Jennifer Campbell is a wonderful example of how to combine theoretical approaches with scientific methods. I would highly recommend to read this study in order to understand domestic craft production and figurine analysis. Let's move on to the context of the figurines. The statuettes in Neolithic Europe are generally restricted to the settlement area and not used as grave goods. Their distribution in all areas of settlements, that is inside and outside of houses, in pits and in cultural layers, seems to be characteristic for southeastern Europe as well as for the Near East. As we remember in Çatalhöyük, was the same. This suggests the conclusion that the statuettes possibly serve different purposes for a limited duration of time. Many figurines, broken and intact, decorated and undecorated, had been found within the same archaeological context. Being deposited together indicates that they may have been used together and their differences played a role in a complex belief system. As to the fine context of the figurines in Teotihuacan, we can assume that they barely are known in the burials. Figurines primarily appear to have belonged to the living, possibly forming part of their household routine, since so many fragments are found. It is also important to highlight that the heads of the figurines frequently were found beyond the boundaries of the city. As new research in the so-called Moon Pyramid show, 100% of the figurines found within the walls of the existing pyramid are handmade. Likewise, mold-made figurines account for only 3% of the total, were all found in the areas outside the walls of the Moon Pyramid. So we see the selection of special types of figurines, as mentioned before, the case in the southeastern Europe, when we have different groups of decoration, different groups of technology together. And here we see the same, that one group is in one context and another group is apart from this. Thus, we can see here the very similar separation of areas within special types of figures, like we have discussed in Europe. For example, in the building 2 of the Moon Pyramid, 4 very different styles are represented. It is possible that this diversity of figurines reflects a number of groups with different figurine traditions living in the general vicinity of the known pyramid. Archaeologists usually take anthropomorphic figurines as a bridge for understanding the relationship between the tangible and intangible reflections of past values. Sometimes they were interpreted as visualized and materialized representations of gods and goddesses, or more recently as toys or auxiliary materials used to practice magic. As to the figurines from the Teotihuacan, because they are found in such quantities, it is assumed that they were not objects of great value. They are usually found in domestic contexts, so they could have been used as children's toys, or more likely in some sort of domestic cult rituals. Teotihuacan was a large, highly stratified state. Thus, many have argued that the variety of headdress and clothing of many figurines represent one of individuals or groups of individuals in Teotihuacan society. Because of the varying degree of dress and ornamentation found on figurines, many archaeologists believe they represent differing social strata. Archaeologists later questioned whether anthropomorphic figurines reflected an actual human body from a past community. So it's interesting. Is it the actual human body? Is it the depiction of that they saw directly and depicted or not? They were carrying some hints about that people looked like. Better yet, were the past communities or individuals expressing idealistic body forms directly onto the anthropomorphic figurines? You might have noticed that figurines are very often depicted as nude. Examples of the dresses in Neolithic figures are really rare. As example, figurines from Cucuteni Tripoli culture can be mentioned. Well-decorated dressed female figures appeared only in the Bronze Age. The situation can be observed the same in Teotihuacan, that the dressed figures replaced the new ones only later. Today we have spoken about portraits, but are they really depicting existing individuals? As more figurines were uncovered and molds were found indicating the mass production of identical portrait heads, most agreed that it was more likely that the unornamented figurines were highly stylized representations of different groups of people at Teotihuacan. Many did concede that due to the great quantities of these portrait figurine heads found in apartment complexes, it is possible that the figures might have been ornamented to represent individuals. Anyway, the question remains the same. Have little clay 3D depictions of human heads a significant potential to affect people in that day? Oh. Figurines are part of active material cultures that affected how people saw their world. As we approach the end of this lecture, I want to emphasize the importance of Marijos Gimbutienės works as synthetic studies in time and space. The pioneering works of European figurines encouraged the following generation of scientists to bring new ideas, emphasizing the diversity in styles, representations, and meanings of the human body. Comparative analysis and figurine studies from all over the world, as we could see in the case of Mexican figurines, shows the similarities in the underlying logic of how people depicted their bodies. One can undoubtedly speak about the meaning and symbolic value of the figurines as universal expression of human behavior. Maybe they were idols of fertility. Maybe they're dolls. Maybe they're portraits of ancestors or living relatives. Maybe they incorporate memories. We will never be able to know to certain if any of these options were correct for those people thousands of years ago. We might ask, that might be the consequences for the communities of having thousands of the figurines in regularly daily touch. Reflecting the need of depictions of human bodies, figures are often materialization of idealized or projected types rather than direct reflections of corporal reality. Figurines could become individuals during ritual performances. For example, such an individualizing process might take place when participants address a figurine by name during the speech or song. When participants dressed figurines in identifying perishable clothing, and then they animated them with a vital force by calling a spirit to come and occupy the figurine. Thus, figurines capture different interactions and performances that are recurrent and dynamic, and link objects, places, and people, both to each other and to their customs and traditions. These relations mutually create a socio-material world, one that gains meaning and value through everyday life. The human-made figurines are things in themselves with their own spheres of interaction. By employing the notion of representation, we are able to infer that figurines stand for something real and are a reflection of that reality or someone or something. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Agna. That was great. It's great to see all those different figurines. Great to see you working with them. We can open it up now. If anybody has any questions, if you want to put your name in the chat, I can call on you. We're a small group also, you can shout it out.
I got a question. Do you find a lot of evidence do you find any evidence at all that things were like draped onto the figurines? I noticed some of them have holes in them. Is that for clothing or headdresses or maybe some other symbolic object that would be attached to them?
Here, no, on those faces we see now, yes, we see the box with 34 heads. No, but the holes are on the figures' faces, just to show you, there are the holes, but those figures are really heavy, you know, so they were not wear on the body.
No, that's sort of my point. They're way too heavy to be worn on a person, but yeah. What about those being attachments for something that's added to the figure?
So I don't here in the collection I didn't find something like that, you know. So this we see now, those are really heavy, as I mentioned here, the big figures here, and on our figures does not have holes for the wearing like idols, like we have the cases in Chatterjee. So I did not discover here in this collection.
Now, and those little heads, would they have been put on some other perishable body? Is that the idea, or?
Yes, I mean, I also was asking if you are asking about those figures we see now on the screen. So I was also asking what they were used for, because they have very small holes here, you know. Those faces here I show you on the ears, these are not so heavy, stone made of this jade made figures. Probably they could be clever, but these, I don't know. These are also a little bit lighter. They are not so heavy faces, but as we see, they are also not finished. It's just like, you know, semi-product, let's say, without clearly finishing features of face, just here. But they also have little holes. This is an issue for the research, for the future research, to clear the to find possible functions of these figures.
Yeah. Interesting. And then the fingerprinting for the males and females was by size. So they
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yes. So it's really a great job done. The fingerprints started, as I mentioned, by Warren Barber, but later on by the colleague here in Buffalo. And yes, and they are different size and different. That's why it is possible to recognize the figure makers quite exactly, which is really a good thing. To my knowledge, such analysis were not done in European figures, you know, anthropomorphic figures. As far as I know, I did not find yet such studies. Of course, fingerprints are studied on different architectonical structures, you know, where clay was used, but not on figurines, which would be, of course, interesting to know. Yeah. But so I think this work, this dissertation about fingerprints, this includes also very good theoretical part and discussions about how figures were used, which meaning they incorporated, you know, and a very good overview of theoretical approaches connected to this question. So it's really a good dissertation, and I mean, it's also a good example what we could do in Europe.
Yeah, excellent. So there's a future research project for folks. Sean, do you want to ask your question? Sean Hanrahan posted in the chat. He said, "Thank you kindly for sharing your work, Dr. Čivilytė. What were some of the challenging experiences you encountered throughout your work during this particular study?"
Yeah, it was very interesting. It is still interesting, yeah, to analyze, to look in more details, to study this, and I hope I will continue it. Besides my Bronze Age research, I will not leave this topic. Yes, it's really interesting.
Huh. And so that would be interesting. Now, when you came upon this study, were you expecting to find what you were finding, or were you thinking it was going to be some other routes that it would take you, or what were you?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, it was like, you know, eye-to-eye contact. I saw these figurines in the museum, and I could not recognize what is it. You know, I just was interested in, because my eye was catched by the heads. You know, and I first thought, okay, heads, part. You know, they are faces, they are heads, so many. And first idea was, you know, as I worked so much with Marijos Gimbutienės this year, especially this year, anniversary year, I thought, yes, it is. Let's look what is it, you know, and I started to look in. So yes, and what was it? Just beginning of the questions. What could it be? And now, yeah, I know really much more about it. So
yeah. And it is kind of fascinating to see the differences, but also the similarities between some of these different figurines.
Yeah, my main idea was, as I saw those objects, that people behave like similarly, very similarly. It doesn't matter what time is it, or which region or area of the world it is. And I try to show you that we can see the same tendencies of human thinking with regard also of depiction of bodies. Yes.
Yeah.
So of course the techniques may be different, cultural, of course, backgrounds, everything, and context. We have here Teotihuacan is a city, big city, yes, and Europe, but we have in Europe also huge settlements, with huge layers, cultural layers, fantastic, flourishing, let's say, material culture, so that people did the same things. And especially the head, I wanted to show and made the attention to that the head is still, you are in Mexico, you are in Çatalhöyük, or you are somewhere in Southeastern Europe, you see the head as well as very important part of the body. Even in the Bronze Age in Europe, in the middle of Germany, we have a sacrifice hoards, yes, like hoard, this deposition of metal artifacts. On this metal artifact deposition, the human skull is lying, on. Right. And the skull was removed post-mortem from the human body. So even in the Bronze Age, we can see similar evidences or similar behaviors. Right. So that is my main idea, to show the similarities of thinking of human beings using this material in the museum.
Great. It's really cool to see all this together. Does anyone have any other questions out there?
Sure, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Oh, yes, please.
Okay. Thank you, Agna. That was very interesting. Generally speaking, anthropomorphism is usually considered to be kind of an involuntary perceptual strategy. Mm-hmm. It's a strategy by which humans tend to guess or expect, sometimes unconsciously, that ambiguous but significant stimuli have human-like or human cause, or that. So what I'm trying to understand in your talk is that why is there this type of anthropomorphism? Is it because that people try to derive comfort from the fact that when they look at things, they represent things as being human, even if they're not, like pieces of clay? Or is it because it gives us comfort about the fact that our self-knowledge is not very deep? Why do you think we have this kind of anthropomorphism going on around, as you have shown so nicely, in totally different contexts, in totally different parts of the world? Thank you.
Yes, I think that it is just a natural action of human creation. They just wanted to depict the bodies of human which is surrounding them. They depicted also the animals, not only humans, but yes, the human body, especially naked body, is something that is very important for human existence, So that is in my opinion, this is the main reason, just the essential need to depict the human body. But interestingly, and I have to note it, then speaking about Neolithic Europe, we have to bear in mind that this mass human depiction process ends at the Bronze Age, that the early Bronze Age, in the Copper Age started already to disappear the human body depiction. So it's really a Neolithic, let's say, phenomena depiction of those bodies that is probably really connected to the cultural processes and innovations like settled in and connection to the agriculture. And we also see some shifts in economy of those people, like appearance of the cattle. When the cattle appears, we see man symbols. Man symbols as fallow, more fallow appears with cattle. So you see really a reason inside in the world, special reasons why the people start to depict something which were for them really important. Woman, yes, woman is very, yeah, woman is essential human being, giving new generations, bringing children, etc. But men as well, and this is really connected to this, some activities in human lives like husbandry, yes, animals, etc. So I think it's a complicated question. But my opinion is absolutely natural need to depict the human body as an essential element of the world.
May I just continue along that for one more moment, please?
Yeah.
So if I understood what you just said, there are periods in at least European prehistory when we don't find very much or no anthropomorphic figures whatsoever. If that's the case, what replaces them as part of this kind of if anthropomorphism is kind of a universal requirement or characteristic of the way humans relate to nature, in the way of transforming nature into something that's similar to themselves. So if we actually have periods of time when we don't have anthropomorphic figures, what replaces that in terms of those same similar kinds of processes, do you think?
You know, I have one idea with regard to this, and I was thinking about it, and thank you for this question. For example, even when they speak about Neolithic Europe, and we go to the Baltic country, to the Baltic Sea, we will find only couple hands, so 5 fingers, let's say, of figurines, anthropomorphic figurines there. People did not depict them at all. They could do the same. They could choose the clay and make figurines, but we did not. So even in the same period of time, there were regions which do not depict human body in Europe as well. There were empty regions without the human body. I don't know what was replaced. Then I speak about Baltic region. We even don't have colored polychrome pottery. Only simple ornamentation on the pottery. That means people did not have belonging to make, let's say, artistic expressions. We did not have belonging to make something very, very special, which would be so I think maybe it is related also to this special cultural developments, and that's why is the human body more impressed or expressed in regions where we have really huge settlements and economy and exchange and etc. But what was replaced? Probably nothing. We can assume, of course, that organic materials which disappeared, just like bags, or flax, or even bread. Yes. So, and we do not find. But I would not believe in that. I think if they would have need to make human figurines, they would really make in stone, in bone, or even in clay. clay was available everywhere. So it's really hard to answer this question. But I think it's just negative reaction to something creative. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Agna. Any other questions? All right, then I think, join me. Let's everybody thank Agna. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. It's really great to hear your new insights into some of these figurines and to see them out again. So
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Yeah. Have a good afternoon. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.